Have you ever wondered about the horrors experienced by those present at the scene of a major industrial disaster? Our story begins on the night of December 3rd, 1984 at Bhopal Junction, a bustling train station in the heart of Bhopal, India. Station Superintendent H.S. Burvi and his deputy Ghulam Dastagir were on duty when the Gorakhpur-Bombay Express pulled in. As the train arrived, Dastagir stepped out of his cabin, only to be assaulted by a strange sensation. His eyes began to burn, his throat felt raw. Concerned, he went in search of Burvi, hoping to discuss these bizarre symptoms. But when he found his superior, Burvi was lying motionless on the ground. The realization hit Dastagir like a freight train. Just a kilometer away from Bhopal Junction stood the Union Carbide factory, which had become the epicenter of a catastrophic event. An incident had occurred, releasing a deadly cocktail of 50,000 pounds of poisonous gases, including MIC, hydrogen cyanide, and phosgene. These lethal fumes were spreading rapidly throughout the city. With Burvi gone, Dastagir became the most senior person present, thrust into a role he could never have prepared for. He knew the Gorakhpur-bound train needed to leave immediately, despite its scheduled departure still being 20 minutes away. His mind raced, but his priority was clear: to protect the passengers from the encroaching gas. Breaking protocol, Dastagir ordered the station staff to clear the way for an early departure. He assumed all responsibilities for this decision, knowing full well the potential consequences. But the safety of the passengers was paramount, and every second counted. Meanwhile, the station was becoming a refuge for the city's inhabitants. Those experiencing difficulty breathing flocked to the station, seeking help and answers. The atmosphere was thick with fear and confusion. Dastagir found himself in the midst of this chaos, trying to manage the situation while also grappling with the magnitude of the unfolding disaster. As the most senior person present, Dastagir faced the daunting task of managing the chaos and ensuring the safety of the passengers. The poisonous gas didn't take long to spread throughout the city. In the blink of an eye, the once peaceful Bhopal transformed into a city gripped by panic and confusion. The air, heavy with the lethal concoction of chemicals, seeped into every household, every street, every nook and cranny. Bhopal Junction, a bustling hub of the city, became a refuge for those who hoped to escape the deadly gas. The station was soon teeming with people, their faces etched with fear, their bodies racked with the effects of the gas. Coughs echoed through the station, intermingled with cries of pain and fear. The scene was chaotic, to say the least. Amidst this pandemonium, Deputy Station Superintendent Ghulam Dastagir stood as a beacon of hope. He was at the helm, managing the crowd, directing the terrified citizens and assuring everyone that help was on the way. His voice, though strained from the effects of the gas, resonated with authority and calm, providing a semblance of order in the chaos. Help arrived in the form of ambulances, paramedics, and railway doctors. They rushed to the station, their sirens piercing through the eerie silence that had fallen over the city. Dastagir coordinated with them, directing them towards those in dire need of medical attention. However, the gas was relentless. It continued to spread, its deadly reach extending further into the city. The medical team, despite their tireless efforts, struggled to keep up with the growing number of affected people. It was a race against time, a battle against an invisible enemy. As the night wore on, the situation at Bhopal Junction became increasingly desperate. More and more people poured into the station, their faces a grim reflection of the horror unfolding around them. The air was thick with fear, every breath a painful reminder of the disaster that had befallen the city. Despite their best efforts, escaping the poisonous gas proved challenging for everyone present. The gas, like an unrelenting enemy, continued its deadly march across the city, leaving behind a trail of destruction and despair. While the station was in chaos, the situation at Hamidia Hospital was equally alarming. Just 3 kilometers away from the Union Carbide factory, the hospital was quickly becoming a hub of confusion and fear. With a capacity of about 1,200 beds, Hamidia Hospital was the largest in Bhopal, but nothing could have prepared it for the wave of patients that began to flood in shortly after 1 in the morning. The first patient arrived complaining of eye irritation. Within 5 minutes, over 1,000 people had descended on the hospital, all coughing, crying, and struggling to breathe. The medical staff, caught off guard, were completely unprepared for the onslaught. They had no idea what they were dealing with, as the symptoms were unfamiliar and the cause unknown. It was a scene of utter turmoil. Patients were everywhere, sprawled on the floor, slumped in chairs, gasping for breath. The doctors and nurses did their best, but they were fighting an invisible enemy. There was no precedent for this, no protocol to follow, no known antidote for the gas that was causing the symptoms. In the midst of the chaos, some of the doctors attempted to contact the Union Carbide factory for information. The factory's own medical officer, Dr. L.D. Lawyer, assured them that the gas was not poisonous and suggested applying wet bandages to the patient's eyes. But as patient after patient arrived in increasing distress, it became painfully clear that this was not just a case of eye irritation. The hospital staff were frustrated and horrified. They were on the front lines of a disaster they didn't understand, with no guidance on how to treat the victims. Despite their best efforts, they were unable to stem the tide of suffering. The hospital, like the city around it, was in the grip of a crisis that was rapidly spiraling out of control. The hospital staff were left in the dark, struggling to treat the victims of a disaster they didn't understand. As the disaster unfolded, the police were also trying to understand the situation. Superintendent of Police Swaraj Puri was the man on the front line for the police force. He arrived at the control room around 1:15 in the morning. The sight that greeted him was alarming. His staff were coughing uncontrollably, rubbing their eyes, and struggling to breathe. The severity of the situation was immediately apparent to him. Puri wasted no time. He picked up the phone and dialed the Union Carbide factory. The conversation that unfolded was both baffling and concerning. The factory officials assured him that everything was under control. They downplayed the gravity of the situation, insisting that the gas was non-toxic. Puri, however, was not convinced. His instincts told him that something was seriously wrong. He saw his staff suffering and he knew he had to act. Not willing to take their word for it, Puri called the factory again. The response was the same. They reassured him that there was no cause for concern, but the evidence in front of him told a different story. Puri knew he couldn't rely on the factory's assurances, so he made a third call. This time, the truth started to emerge. The factory finally admitted there had been a gas leak. Puri's suspicions were confirmed, but the admission came with a chilling realization. The gas was already spreading across the city, and thousands of people were at risk. Puri immediately mobilized his force, but he knew they were racing against time. The police worked tirelessly, doing their best to manage the chaos and guide people to safety. But the magnitude of the disaster was overwhelming. The lack of information and the factory's initial denial had cost them precious time, and for many, it was already too late. The truth about the disaster was finally coming to light, but it was too late for many. In the aftermath of the disaster, the scale of devastation was becoming clear. The dawn of December 4th, 1984, unveiled an eerie sight. The streets of Bhopal were littered with the lifeless bodies of humans and animals alike, a silent testament to the lethal power of the gas that had enveloped the city just hours before. The Bhopal gas tragedy claimed the lives of over 3,000 people within the first few days. Those who survived did not escape unscathed. They were plagued with chronic illnesses, respiratory disorders, blindness, and even birth defects in the years to come. A generation was marked by a tragedy they had no part in causing. The city too bore the scars of that dreadful night for decades. The soil and groundwater were contaminated, affecting agriculture and making potable water a scarce commodity. The once bustling city was now a ghost town, its inhabitants either gone or too sick to contribute to the vibrancy it once had. And amidst this devastation, Union Carbide, the corporation responsible for the disaster, faced legal and environmental consequences. However, to many, the punishment did not fit the crime. The company paid a settlement of $470 million, a meager sum compared to the magnitude of the disaster. The factory site was never properly cleaned up, leaving a toxic legacy that continues to harm the environment and the people of Bhopal. The Bhopal gas tragedy is not just a tale of an industrial disaster. It's a story of corporate negligence, of insufficient safety measures, and of a lack of transparency that cost thousands their lives and affected millions more. It's a stark reminder that progress and industrialization, while important, should never come at the cost of human lives and environmental health. As we remember Bhopal, let it serve as a warning and a call to action. Let it remind us of the importance of safety protocols, of corporate responsibility, and of the value of human life over profit. The Bhopal gas tragedy remains a stark reminder of the potential dangers of industrial disasters and the importance of safety and transparency.